I mean, I was already not wearing underwear, so I thought I was doing my bit.
Hi, I'm Andy,
And I'm Roger,
and welcome to The Middle,
where we try to have thoughtful conversations
about awkward topics.
on our search to find the middle.
That's phobic.
I don't feel war. I just own halfway to Siwa.
A few moments ago, Buckingham Palace announced the death of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II.
I act as if God exists.
Put your masks on.
How dare you! You have stolen my dreams and my childhood with your empty words.
Hey Roger,
Hey Andy, how you doing?
pretty good. We've got something a little bit different for our listeners today, don't we?
What do they say? Big things have small beginnings. And we began our journey together by trying to get our collective arms around the waist of what it means to be overweight. And it was an interesting first chat. We kind of used it as a way to explore and find our voice. And we've recently re-listened to it, right?
Yeah, that's right. So the episode today you're about to listen to is one of the earlier pieces of content that we recorded. We've since gotten the hang of using our equipment and audio editing, so the quality of this isn't 100%, but it's still very listenable, and we encourage you to listen on, and we hope you enjoy the episode.
Yeah, everyone loves a free holiday, and I was just saying, actually, my kids know that the Queen has died, but apart from that, they've got no idea, and they asked absolutely zero follow-up questions on why. And I think that's the Australian approach, really, because it's just about accepting the holiday for what it is.
Well,
How
wasn't
about
the
you?
the Queen's birthday isn't on the Queen's birthday anyway, is it right? So there's a
Kinda
few
like
peculiarities.
Jesus and Christmas.
Yeah, and a little bit like how our day of mourning for Queen Elizabeth II is not on the day of her funeral. It's a couple of days later, much like all things in Australia. It seemed to come a little bit later than the rest of the world.
I know, although streaming's changed that, which I love.
So what are we talking about today?
So we sat down and we had a range of episodes, and the ones one we actually settled on today was about weight, and to cut straight to it, what is being overweight? What does it mean to be fat? And is it okay to have judgment over someone and the weight that they carry? And how do you make sense of the modern interpretations of what it means to be in good health as a person?
Just to go back to some of the terms you've just mentioned, so overweight, obese, fat. Is fat like the equivalent of a racial slur?
Yeah, look, I mean, it's. I think this is where we should have a little discussion around, like, what is weight? Weight from a medical term versus just this kind of term being fat, and the composition of your body. I think it's very hard to kind of draw that line between something clinical and medical versus just what's culturally appropriate, in terms of the way you look and the way you have. And I think it's contextual as well, right? Obviously, being fat or out of shape in a very physically demanding line of work is different from being fat and out of shape as a, dare I say, like a software developer or something, an office job. So I don't know. I mean, how do you describe it if you were to kind of throw it out there?
So I think one of the things that, I did a bit of Googling, as part of this.
2 minutes of research, yeah.
Yeah, a bit of research. One of the things that I sort of picked up on is there's like two competing sides, right? So you've got a community of maybe medical professionals or advocates or whatever saying, here you need to really do all of these things because if you're zero point 0.1 of a kilo or 100 grams over this amount, then you're in this other category, which means you're at higher risk of, heart disease or diabetes or whatever. And they're quite strong in their advocacy that we should all be within a certain size because they're looking at it from the perspective of health and health outcomes. And they're probably drawing on research that does, draw a direct correlation between your size and your health outcomes. But then on the other side of the fence, you've got this whole community of people who embrace their size. They embrace their body image. They don't like being fat shamed, So it's any suggestion that they're somehow the way they look, or their size, their weight is somehow a negative thing, is seen through quite a negative light.
Yeah, I think it also, like, this whole topic where my mind goes is very much about personal responsibility and how much control you have over these things. And I think that's where some of these arguments get really interesting. Is if you see someone on the street and they are overweight, and we'll keep coming back to the definitions and what we mean by overweight as we go through. But if you see that person, how much control do you give them? Like, how much agency do they have for the way that they have turned out? And even more so when, you see a family of people who are larger or overweight. And I think that's something that definitely plays out. It's like, how much control do people have over that versus, what is predetermined by their genetics, nature versus nurture, all these kind of things enters into the conversation as well.
So perhaps then, if we start by painting a picture, a spectrum of, a scale. So no pun intended. We
You
have
can't do any more, apparently.
So what we have is a commonly used metric is BMI, or body mass index, which for the nerds is your weight divided by your height squared. So it's a measure to try and come up with some variable that we can objectively assess whether someone is overweight, obese, within normal range. So it's a little bit unintuitive because people probably get on the scales and their scales give them, a number, probably in kilos if you're in a country that uses the metric system. And this is sort of does a few calculations on top of that to give you a figure. But broadly speaking, you have normal weight, which is actually probably below what the average weight of someone, certainly in a country like Australia, where we're both located in. But then you have overweight, and then, or actually, I saw the World Health Organization referred to that as pre-obesity. So they're trying to send like a message to people in that category. Then you have obesity classes 1, 2, and 3. So, so you've got like you're obese, but then you've got like the extra levels on top of that. So.
Yeah.
I actually did I don't know whether you sort of, what your BMI is, but coming into this, I thought, I'm going to check that out because I'm sort of watching the weight, do get on the scales every now and then. So my BMI is 27.5, which is, according to the World Health Organization, the pre-obesity category. So I think I would prefer the overweight name. So don't let's not fat shame overweight people here, but closer to the normal weight side than that. Or maybe it isn't. It's about halfway in the middle. So I'm halfway between normal weight and obesity class 1. But to give you some sense of where you'd be, so if you're obesity class 1, you'd be 103 kilos with someone of my weight. And up to obesity class 3, 137 kilos, so and above. So we're talking pretty heavy weights here.
Yeah. Look, I grabbed my phone just as you were saying that because I do weigh myself every now and then. I actually have even one of those fancy scales that sync it to my phone. But BMI is not something that I look at because it's just not a metric that makes a lot of sense for me. It moves very slowly, and I've just never tracked it. But I'm looking at my phone. I'm a 22, so I think that's for me that is quite normal for me. But I think this is also one of the arguments that I see all the time: is the BMI is it's a very crude, population style metric and equation. It doesn't really take into account composition, which is the main argument I see against it, right? So doesn't distinguish between whether your composition is muscle or fat. You can be like a bodybuilder and be obese because you've pumped up your lean muscle mass incredibly, or you could be like have zero muscle mass and then your BMI is not a true reflection of your composition, the shape that you're in.
But the challenge with that though is like, people looking at their BMI because they're worried about their health. They're not bodybuilders, right? So people who like the GPs that say, "What's your BMI?" and go like, "This is the communication tool to people who
Yeah.
need." Yeah.
But it does play out in studies, though. I think that's what they're saying when they're trying to like look at population studies of BMI. And I guess the confusing thing for me is a while ago, I'm not even sure, a couple of years ago, they started to say that if you had any even minor amounts of visceral fat and a bit of fat around your abdomen, as a man especially, your risks increased a lot. And it wasn't really classified as obesity. They were talking about just general abdominal fat. So there's a few different messages out there, I think. And look, can you should we be discussing kind of these BMI and the move away from it and something more universal? I don't think so. I think that for me, it's like just being slightly overweight matter versus being morbidly obese. And like you said, some of those weights you were throwing around, which are like, your big boys.
So just to the concept of that word you use, big boys. So 137 kilos at my height. So just for anyone listening, I'm around 6 foot, so 185 centimeters. So you're like obesity class 3. That's like the top of the scale at 137 kilos. But actually, like, I think someone at 137 kilos, a big person, a big boy, or a big girl, but still within a range that, like, I mean, we're not talking about someone that needs a forklift
Yeah.
to take them out of a building to take them to the hospital. We're talking about a person who might, goes to work normally, catches the train to work, gets a plane, lives a normal life.
And that's why I think that, to me, just expanding this a bit further, health versus what we perceive as fitness or functional fitness, and even sexuality, or sorry, not sexuality, like how attractive you are. They're not linked. I don't think they're that linked. There is a crossover point, but you can have an athlete that looks quite overweight, but performs really well. I think you can have a man or a woman who is clinically obese that actually carries it really well in their frame and still is sexually attractive. So I think that there are guidelines, but there are kind of exceptions to that. And I think that people hold weight really differently. And you see it, right? Everyone's a different shape. Some people put on weight in their face and it's very obvious. Other people, especially men, can like get away with that gorilla-y bear type of look and hide vast amounts of like fat and bulk in their torso, right? So I think it's a complicated thing because we're all so unique in our build and our composition, right?
In thinking about this, like, when does weight become a problem? Like, what are the factors that gives you or I, and look, I've already revealed that I'm in the overweight category, so perhaps I shouldn't be judging. But at what point do either you or I get to, or anyone else get to, judge someone based on the weight? Like,
Yeah.
what's the factor where you genuinely have the right to say, hang on, that person is too big? And at what point are you actually being prejudiced?
Well, okay, I'll give you something for me, right? So you've shared your stats, so I'll kind of talk a little bit mine so that the listeners can kind of imagine what we're working with here. I'm 5'7.5". I'm kind of at that BMI, so I've always been a relatively, I suppose, small-framed individual. And I've probably for most of my life been what fitness people would classify as skinny fat. So smaller framed, just due to my genetics, but a bit pudgy, fairly round face, and just soft, right? No real lean muscle mass. So that's kind of me. And I've gone through periods of my life of actually transforming my body into much lower body fat percentages to where I could like see a lot more definition and so on. But I've never been a really big person, but I've been a skinny fat person. And going back to your question on a personal experience of where you can judge, I've had the experience of, I think a lot of people that are smaller framed have had the experience of being on like a plane or a bus and sitting next to someone who is just physically a lot bigger and a lot, they're just a different human, right? As we would say, big fellas, right? And being quite put out by it. And I had this experience where I was flying on Qantas for business and I was jammed like a fucking wiener between two massive man buns, right? Like seriously, both sides, I had the middle seat. Huge guys, thick, overflowing, like struggling. And one of them was trying their best. Like seriously, he was just willing himself to fit inside this economy seat, but he just was failing miserably. And we were getting side impact here. Like I had curtains going on, right? And I was so uncomfortable. Like everyone was uncomfortable, but I was uncomfortable too, and I was being punished for the situation. And then on the flight, I had an issue with my baggage weight, so it was outside of the the allocated.
You should
7
have just
kilos
put your
or whatever.
clothes on, any clothes you had in the bag, just double layers.
I mean, I was already not wearing underwear, so I thought I was doing my bit for the cargo. But I mean, to me, that just was just the straw that broke it, because I'm like, I'm sitting here at 68 kilos or something, and these dudes are like, they're pushing 130, 150, whatever they are, I don't know, spilling on. I'm being inconvenienced, and I'm getting punished for the baggage that I'm bringing in being, half a kilo over.
So do you think
And I was just like, man, that's not cool.
airlines should have a policy of making people over
Get
a
weighed
certain
with your
weight?
bag.
Like, yeah, well, that's an extreme one, but let's say at the minimum, buy a second seat, right? If you're over, I don't know, like let's say 100, if you're 130, 40 kilos, and you are going to cause that, should you be compelled to buy a second seat? I know that's the policy if you can't comfortably fit in one seat for most airlines, that even just for safety reasons. But should it be free? Should the airlines provide that for free? Should it be an entitlement? Should it be discounted? Should it be full freight? Or should they be turned away at the airport and told that they're not allowed to fly?
Yeah, look, I think I come at it. I'm not really, don't want to be petty about this, right? Unless it's hilarious, and then I will be petty. But I think that people should be treated with dignity wherever possible. And like, I just expect a little bit of judgment to be had. So for example, if they see someone like me who's obviously under the average weight for, a male, and my bag's over by half a kilo, surely they can use a little bit of discretion there, because they're not penalizing, the guy that's fucking bending the brackets as he's walking
But
through.
why would you expect for like even a split second that Qantas or any other airline for that matter cares about anything other than maximizing profits and revenue, right? So they'll get, if they seem to be fat shaming, they'll get in the media. It'll be this whole controversy. You'll have Alan Joyce on the news like apologizing for a month, So there's like a bit of an equilibrium going on.
Oh, I get it. And that's what I mean, where I think people should be treated with dignity, right? Like, I don't think that you should ever shame someone for their weight, but I think there should be some allowances for that, right? And I do think, like, if you are building an airline and your customers, and you know that your clientele is bigger, then maybe you should kind of factor that in, or deal with it, right? But look, I think that's one way where, you need to go back to how much control that these people have for the way they are. Height's not something you can control. You don't have to tell me that. And I think that that plays a big factor into, airlines and stuff like that, and transportation. But some of this, I think, if I bring it back to kind of fundamentals, if I see someone who is kind of morbidly obese. We're talking about there's an incredible amount of girth going on. They're struggling to do functional movements and so on like that. My mind doesn't go to, as a human, doesn't go to, oh my God, like this person is sickening or whatever it is. I often think that there's a complex set of issues that have taken them to that place, right? And I don't think it's anyone's happy or healthy at that weight, right? So I don't believe that healthy at any weight extends all the way to that upper end of the scale. Like I think that for 99% of people would think that is what I believe.
So just to put some figures out there, John Brower Minich, he is the heaviest human ever recorded. Just to take a straw poll, Rog, what do you reckon? What it's in the hundreds, but give me a range where you reckon he comes in at.
The heaviest human?
Heaviest human
oh my God.
ever recorded.
It's way more than I can probably imagine, because to me, I'm thinking like, man, I'm thinking like 380 kilos, maybe something like that. But I think it's way more.
Yeah, it's way more. So around double that. So 635
Double?
kilos. So
No.
which is like at the far like extreme of the distribution. So we're not really talking about. This is not the systemic issue that we're talking about today. This is like, I mean, 200 years ago he would have been in a zoo or something like that. Like that's how they would have treated someone like that. So
There's some like thyroid, human growth hormone situation, surely.
Yeah, no doubt. So, but I just want to pick up on what you said before around control, and particularly for someone who is very, very large and has a very, let's say well above average weight and control. So I think there's one of the reasons why I think it's common for people, let's say within a normal range, and by normal range I mean, let's say, can function a normal everyday life, but then looks at someone who is much bigger than that and can sort of see very clear impacts in the way that they live their lives. One of the reasons we almost on average, not everyone, we have some very compassionate people, but at least a typical response is disdain and contempt, right? It's, how could you let yourself get that way? How fucking like out of control are you that you just have to go for that extra donut, or that you can't stop yourself, and it's almost like you must be so weak and like. But I'm interested in this concept of sort of control and free will and how much we can actually control that, because you can't control that thought that comes into your mind, right? You don't write your own story, right? You don't write the story that comes into your mind, like, I need to have this, oh, this will help me if I have this extra bit of food or this sugary drink or whatever. And so then does that leave that person then who has those impulses any like more reprehensible than the adrenaline junkie that can't help but take risks, do like skydiving, so what's the difference? Like, are we like, when does that end and when does that stop?
Yeah, I mean, I think going back to my perspective on the control thing is, it very much is, like you said, I think we have similar sensibilities in that regard, that we both believe in that kind of randomness of thought and that lack of control in terms of how it springs into being, right? So food is an addiction. I think it's been proven to have a similar response to other really addictive substances and the dopamine receptors in your brain. I think that, and the weird thing about food is it's a drug by any other name, and it's something that we've all tried, right? I think that even if you are a super disciplined kind of guy, gal, you've had the experience of binge. You've had the experience of eating something, too much of something that you didn't want to eat, or you knew you shouldn't have eaten, even to the extent where like I suffer from heartburn. Like it literally feels as if I were to be having a heart attack. I kind of know some foods that do it to me, and I eat them anyway sometimes. Like that's how much of a hold food has on, impulses and cravings and all these kind of things. So I don't for a second think that it's easy. And I think that everyone's experienced it to a degree. It's just some people get away with it more. Some people start from a better base, and maybe that's from their upbringing or the genetics or whatever it is. And they can afford to roll with those punches of times where you just let loose and just, eat that whole pizza, drink that whole 1.25 liter bottle of Coke, and like, I think everyone's had that experience.
So I think one of the things that it is, particularly in the context of like, what can self-control and can we be blamed for our choices? And it's actually quite hard to do that when there's an abundance of messages telling here's this thing that you can have, and it you can have it right now. Well, it's fast food. We'll make it for you right away. It'll be cheap. It'll be probably the cheapest bit of joy you can have in your day today, right? So and there's actually like this sort of notion of a relationship between obesity and socioeconomic status. So you have more or higher rates of obesity in lower socioeconomic areas than you do in higher which counters like the whole of history where being overweight was almost like a sign of I'm rich and I have resources and I can eat not just one chicken but two chickens because at my feast because I'm so rich.
It's that fat cat, baby.
And yeah, and now it's like now it's reversed, right? So I think
it's wellness.
What happens, yeah, and so at a global level, when you have countries that develop, you have actually you have the inverse of that, right? So low income economies tend to have lower rates of obesity because there's fewer resources, or to the extent that there's still food available, then people are more active and they're doing more manual work or whatever. And then as countries go up the economic development scale, they start to buy dishwashers and do more professional work where they're sitting behind an office. And then, by the way, McDonald's and Pizza Hut see an opportunity.
I think so. It's like a cumulative impact, right? Like you said, as you move through that socioeconomic level, you tend to have all these things that just turn against you, more sedentary lifestyles, more stress, that kind of thing. But I do think it's a complicated thing. Like I think that when you were to look at somewhere like Italy, right, and they have a really interesting relationship with their food. They don't have a lot of fast food culture. It's not really tolerated in their countries, their cities and things like that. You see less fast food. But let's be honest, Italian food, at least the stuff that you see in the cities and things, it's not always that healthy either. It's kind of the anti-diet food of the West, very carb heavy, a lot of fats, that kind of thing. And I think that they balance that out by more lifestyle factors, and especially in more country areas, which improves their longevity and so on. So I think it's like a complex situation between, your lifestyle and the kind of food you eat. I do think that the food that we have today and the access to the food that we have is getting just like ridiculous, right? So I'll give you an example. So I had this moment where I went to this gelato place. It was like one of those really over the top places where it's like, okay, you want a milkshake? Well, how about we give it to you in a glass that's been frosted in chocolate and then rolled in nuts, and then we'll fill it up with cream, place a Nutella donut on top. We'll stab that donut with a fork, use it as like a skewer to build another layer where there's like a brownie piece on top, and then we'll like put a marshmallow and we'll blowtorch it on, and that'll be like, sure, you'll pay $18, but you'll have like 1 billion calories and fix this craving, right? I could just imagine boomer parents looking at this and just being so disgusted, right? Because there's a room full of people having this at like 3 p.m. It's not even like part of a meal or, this would be some celebration style, like once a season style eating. And there's a place that's just like pumping this out 3 p.m. on like a week, on a weekday. Is just crazy. And I think that kind of culture has changed around the type of food we eat and how decadent it can be, how satisfying it can be. And it's like an arms race, right? Instagram has really pushed that as well. I feel like you see some really shocking and like amazing food porn there. And it's just like lifted the game for the average cafe, the average, place that you go.
Yeah, so I mean, really, it's a question of like how can you really control like yourself navigating that that kind of environment and even sizes too. Like when you see that it's actually better in Australia than elsewhere. I mean, I know in America you order a Coke from like a McDonald's or a burger chain or something, and you basically get a bucket of Coke, and you just sort of think like, what hope do people in these countries have? But actually, just to sort of bring it back to the concept of like what rights do we have to challenge the decisions. I mean, at the end of the day, if you're happy with yourself and you don't really care about this, and you're quite happy you want to live the way you live your life, and at the end of the day, even if there is a health cost or consequence, what is it to anyone else? Like, what right does anyone else have to say, no, you're making the wrong decision for yourself?
Yeah. Okay. I totally get that because and one of the things I was reflecting on as I was just preparing mentally for this chat was that we both come from that angle, right? So of not wanting to interfere in people's lives and actually slightly libertarian style kind of sensibilities, right? Or at least can appreciate that idea of live and let live kind of thing. Let's take it to a much more personal space, and let's think about it. We both have, and let's pick on men for a second, okay? We both have sons. What if either of our sons, okay, I'll ask it to you first. What if your boy started to become very overweight, and you could see it kind of starting to happen? There were certain habits forming, and perhaps it was taking a bit faster than you could have imagined, and there was like started to balloon in front of your eyes. Now you do have a right as a parent, but also someone you care about. We can extend that thought later on, but how would you react in that scenario where you do have judgment and kind of carriage over this person's life?
Well, I guess if the starting premise is that I have judgment, as in I've concluded to myself that it's a problem, because I think there is a question like, just because someone's put on weight, at what point does it actually become a problem, and should it be a problem? Because this is a similar sort of question to, 30 years ago, that would have been asked of a parent who has a gay, like a child who's gay, right? Like, should you be worried about this? And I think, to bring it back to basics, like, if it doesn't have any consequence to anyone else, or even for, and most importantly for themselves, because as a parent, that's what you're mostly worried about, is the consequence for them, then you shouldn't really worry at all, in much the same way as I think modern parents wouldn't care if their children were gay, right? But I guess the question is, if it's bad for their health, or you're worried about that aspect of it, I think you also have to ask yourself, well, what have you done to contribute to the situation? So have you provided the right environment? And that's quite hard as a parent too, because I know with my son, he doesn't eat a lot of different foods that we would like him to eat, right? So we want to make sure he's well fed. We want to make sure he goes to bed with food, with having had dinner and having had lunch and breakfast and all of that. So if at the margin, the alternative is, will you have this very healthy breakfast, wheat bix or something like that? And if the answer is no,
Yeah.
then Nutrigrain suddenly comes on the table, right?
Yeah, you gotta up that game, that cereal game. I know just what you mean though, man, because and you know, but we've got the picky eating thing going on as well, right? And every parent, well, most parents have a little bit of that at a point in time, and it's really tough because there's always this, as soon as you have a picky eater, there seems to be this anxiety around food, and you want to make it like um, a relaxed relationship with food. But it's hard when you feel that you're letting them down by not they're not having the nutrition that they should have, right? Um, and then I reflect back on my childhood, and I'm a first generation Australian, and my parents are from Malaysia, and a lot of the childhood food that I had was pretty out there. And I remember meals, especially dinner time, being really stressful. Really at a certain age, I would really kind of loathe them because there was always going to be food that I didn't like. It was always going to be this showdown with like my dad or my mum, and it became this really stressful thing. And I didn't really ever want that for my kids. But when you're presented with that standoff and they're just not eating anything, it does become hard, right? And you do want to get the calories into them, and you will be willing to take pretty much anything when it gets really bad. Um, I don't know though, when it comes to weight and bad habits and things like that, I do think that it's more than health for me when I look at it because it's one of those things where being overweight does affect you socially. It probably takes a little bit of the joy out of certain activities, certain sports, certain movements, your confidence around enjoying things like the beach and stuff like that. And everyone's different. Maybe that is not a concern for our kids growing up. But I guess maybe I'm projecting a bit from, when we were young. But it does kind of affect you and affects your confidence, and that I think seeps into lots of different areas of areas of your life. And I kind of wish that I was taught a little bit more about nutrition and had a bit more of that grounding when I was younger.
But see, the problem with that though is
I
that
don't know.
that's like saying, well, it's tough to be gay, right? It's tough to live as a gay person in the world. So you should just not be gay, right? You should just marry marry someone, marry a woman, have children, just deny it, right?
Whoa,
Um,
how do we get to that?
no, but like
Yeah,
to say that, it's just that there's a social cost to being,
yeah,
bigger or, not fitting within the mold. Therefore, you should just, do like, you should just completely like shape up, send them to the gym, starve them. So I guess the question is, that's not really their problem. That's actually society's problem, right? So I think what we really need to separate is the private costs associated with being overweight, so or obese or whatever. So the costs that accrue to the individual in terms of whether that's lower life expectancy, whether that's having to buy two seats on an aeroplane, whatever, right?
sit next to me
Yeah, like those are
and have me
private
make a podcast
costs.
episode about it later.
Exactly. I mean, those are costs that are incurred to the individual, and they can make that decision. But I think we should talk about the public costs, the costs to
Yeah.
everyone else. So, a study in 2010. Now, look, this is one study. I'm sure there's different studies that will say different things, but government healthcare costs, so like government subsidies towards the healthcare of individuals for someone within a normal BMI range is $2,948 per year, and that increases up to $3,737 per year for someone overweight and $4,153 for someone who's obese. So we're talking about either $700 or $800, $900 or no, even more than that, you know, like $1,000 more for like a year per person who's obese that the rest of us are subsidizing. Are we happy with that? Is our spirit of tolerance, does it extend to being content with paying that?
Yeah, it's tough, and I think like not to bring a future episode with COVID into it, but there's clearly there's clearly consequences that reach further than we thought, and you see that the obesity comorbidities and things with COVID, there was a really big impact there, right? Like it's a threat on many levels. Um, and yeah, look, I think that there needs to be, and there has been programs for a long, long time to try to help purely from the whole economics of the situation, right? Um, and I do think that with the proper education and training, a big part of the needle can be moved, not all. And I think that some people are in really deep in terms of their lifestyle situation and their access to the right environments. But I do think that, yeah, like there can be a lot be done around programs, exercise and nutrition programs to help a lot. And then we haven't even started to scratch the surface of medical interventions around this stuff. Um, but yeah, it's probably not right to punish people who are a little bit more responsible with their health. And being overweight is just one of those factors, right? You'd have to kind of extend that to people who abuse their health in other ways too, right? Whether it's substance abuse or
But we do that. I
high
mean,
risk taking
we have
activities.
excise tax on alcohol. We have excise on cigarettes. Like we do that. This is not. So I guess one question is, so in the UK they've recently, well in 2018
Mm.
they put on like a soft drinks industry levy. So a sugar tax, I think it's popularly known as, where it's 24 pence per litre for uh, drinks with more than 8 grams of sugar per 100 mils. In Japan, you have the Metabo law, where they go around and measure the waists of the portly 40 to 75-year-old men, and if a municipal area, local government, has their stats don't stack up, then there's probably some incentive or punishment for not achieving the
No, man.
optimal Japanese dream.
Knowing the Japanese, they'd be able to turn that ship around by just giving them like a sticker chart and just be like,
So I guess that there are these other things we can be doing, right? And I think that the beauty of let's say the tax approach, right, is that it's not just about changing incentives and the fact that you have to pay a little bit more for your can of Coke, right? Uh, uh, we don't have to like give ourselves illusions that suddenly no one's going to drink Coke anymore, but at least we can say, well, that then contributes to the public purse, and offset some of those extra costs.
I like it in a lot of ways, right? And then going back to that cafe that had the ridiculous $19 like milkshake, God knows how much that would cost. And I'm just imagining all these like people trying to get a fix and just paying no matter what it takes to get it. Um, but look, I think that sugar is sugar is a real problem just because like how cheap it is, right? And how it's like the equivalent of the white paint on the walls for rentals. It's such a good bang for buck for these food manufacturers. It makes things heavier, it makes things more addictive, it's cheap. Like, yeah, I think it's been something that has been going on for a long time. A part of me does really resist all of that, of course, like on a personal level, just because I want to be free to make my own bad choices. But and a lot of people can get away with it and can choose to use it in moderation. But I do think there's something there. There's a discussion on how that could be funneled in to fund these other interventions that we're talking about that would really have a big impact on people, right? Like we know that some of that school education and lunches and stuff like that have been very successful, So I think that there needs to probably be a discussion on that.
I tell you, like my pet peeve is this idea or this notion that you have teachers going through school lunch boxes and putting in notes saying, you gave your son a muesli bar with choc chips today, next time put an apple in. But I think, so like a typical like libertarian view on a fat tax is that, we shouldn't be punishing people for making choices and opting in. Like people can just live however they like, and we shouldn't be punishing or trying to influence people's decisions. And I think that's like fair enough, and that's a reasonable starting point. But at the same
Yeah.
time, we tax people for buying homes. We tax people for. I mean, we used to tax women for buying tampons, right? We used to have GST on feminine hygiene
Yeah.
products. So, like, if we can tax some of these things which we know are not good for us, and take off some taxes in other areas where we know that they're generally positive things that we should be encouraging, surely that's a better outcome.
Yeah, true. I mean, didn't K-Rod really try this with his Alcopop tax? Man, I'm barely making ends meet. How am I supposed to host my cousin movie night with Alan's lollies when they're gonna price hike the snakes? It can't be done. They'll be riding in the streets.
To go the other way, right? Fat pride. Talk to me. Tell me a little bit about NAFA.
Yeah, like, okay, NAFA, so National Association to Advance Fat Acceptance. Yeah. And look, it pops up every now and then in popular kind of articles and things about a particular celebrity or a musician sometimes that's usually clinically obese and promoting kind of acceptance. And the type of the crossover here is this body positivity and accepting your shape versus encouraging people that they actually are healthy, and there have been obviously some people who've taken that road where it's not only enough that you accept the way that they look, but they want to try to convince you that it's healthy, or secondary to that, maybe it's attractive, right? And I don't really play in that latter conversation. I think it's perfectly fine for people to have role models and someone that represents them out there on that ledge for them. I think that's a net benefit. Like if you're out there and you're already kind of marginalized by society in so many different ways, right? You're like kind of like square peg in a round hole. Shit doesn't fit, you know, and you've got the stigma of already being overweight. You go out there and you see a celebrity who's killing it, and somehow they've succeeded despite all those systemic disadvantages. Hell yeah, I love it. I just don't think you need to go that step further and say that no, all of a sudden, not only am I overweight or obese, but I'm still healthy, and you don't know, and you shouldn't be able to comment on that. It's like, I just think that it's just a little bit too far for me. I do think that having a role model out there for people who are going through it, hell yeah, I love it.
So they seem to be adopting a very much a movement approach similar to other social causes in the past, whether it's gay rights or particularly in America, civil rights and things like that, to sort of put forward this notion that, like, fuck off, it's me, and I can be who I want to be, how I want to be, and you can just you can mind your own business and do you, I'll do me, and get out of it. Don't judge me.
I like that part. I like that part. I just don't like the trying to convincing people that potentially it's healthy and so on. And I think that there is some mixed research on whether it is possible to really change your weight. In fact, there's a lot of depressing things where people who are overweight that lose their weight, actually it comes back even worse, with different changes in the body and responses. So there is some stuff there that needs to be explored, but this idea that some of the fat acceptance have is that no one ever really can change their weight, and the people that do are very statistical anomalies and outliers. I don't quite believe, and I don't think it's actually a good message to be sending there, because as we've discussed, it's not all about weight. There's like so many benefits of leading a healthy lifestyle, right? And having a mindset for wellness. I don't think it's just about the number on the scale.
Yeah, I think it is quite important to be tolerant of people who, for different reasons, are different for whatever reason, whether it's their weight, whether it's their sexuality, whatever, to the average, to the norm, the majority. But at the same time, for something that is a variable that does get influenced by our own decisions, to retain some sense of responsibility and personal responsibility too. And I think importantly, the message that you can't control it is a message that's basically saying to someone, well, oh look, there's a McDonald's drive through. I just can't help but turn left
Yeah,
to enter, and as opposed to trying to prepare that person to have the will to say, no, I don't need
yeah,
that today. And I think that's actually quite a dangerous message, insofar as we should be trying to arm people to make good
yeah,
decisions still. However, I think at the end of the day, if the message is don't discriminate, don't be cruel, don't be unsympathetic, don't be it's not our role to judge people, right? Others
yeah.
generally, is
But
it?
it isn't. But bringing it back to that, getting personal, we're talking about our sons and so on. Isn't it always the truth that the closest of your friends just give it to you, right? Especially like for men. Actually, I was remembering back, we were on a trip together, and our good friend from the north was there, and I was going through a bit of a pudgy phase, and we were at the beach in Foster, and he said something like, "Oh, mate, you're turning into a fat cunt." It's like this is someone that actually like has my back and likes my company and stuff like that. And I think that sometimes we're a bit too precious about that because the people that love you the most that actually sometimes will tell you what's going on, you know what I mean? Like, and I don't think that it's about how people receive that message too. Like, don't take from that, I think you should be disrespectful to complete strangers or people you don't have a relationship with. But I do think that if you are close to someone, you care about them, you should be able to, I mean, comment on these things without fear and like have that relationship where you can do that is I think it's a goal, right? You know, I I think that's where we should be going.
Is there any last words or final things that you think we should be putting on the table?
Um, so I think like, we had that discussion at the start about what really is too big and where do you draw that line? Is it health? Is it functionality? Is it, you know, attractiveness? I want to come back to the whole attractiveness thing, right? Because for me, I think there is this weird evolutionary yardstick that I use, right? That doesn't have anything to do with BMI or medical. It's kind of like, does someone out there still find you attractive? You know? And I think where that gets me thinking is like, as long as there's still someone out there that like is turned on by looking at you, um, whatever sex that may be, then I think maybe you haven't gone that far. Maybe there is still a place, like, and from that discussion, I would kind of separate people who probably don't have a fetish to those who have like something that's a little bit more off that, uh, you know, paradigm or framework for sexual desire. Just like someone who doesn't have an intense fetish. Because people can be sexually attracted to all sorts of weird stuff, right? But I just mean like the person who probably doesn't have that freaky deaky thing going on. I don't know. What do you think?
Well, I actually think it's interesting that it's actually only a relatively new phenomenon in our whole historical existence, that bodily weight and volume for both men and women hasn't actually had strong visual appeal on average to the masses. So
Like
like
Renaissance lady?
yeah, exactly. So for well, I think pre-Renaissance it was probably most people didn't were lucky to get a meal anyway, so they were all fairly lean and muscular or whatever. Just that's our natural state. But at a time when food was aplenty, but maybe not for everyone, it has been like a signal of wealthiness or whatever, and that's come with
resource.
yeah, exactly, and that it is only a probably since 1900 really onwards that there's been this kind of reversal of that. I mean, but I think like any sort of desire or social sort of phenomenon, there's the extreme of the distribution. So there's the average, what the typical person thinks, but then there's the like the nth person who is interested in God knows what. And there'll always be that, but I do wonder though, like I think it's overplayed to sort of say that there's someone for everyone. I think, there is definitely, I think, a lot of lonely people out there, and it's not because of any one factor. It can be for any reason, any factor that means that they're unable to connect to someone else for a relationship or whatever. So it's I'm not so sure there is someone for everyone. I think there is a lot of people who get many people, and then there's everyone else.
Yeah.
So
Well, ain't that the truth? And I think historically that's like the thing that blows my mind when they talk about like you have twice as many female ancestors than you do male ancestors, right? Because you don't think about it, you just kind of like think that the world is 50-50 male female and everyone just partners up and gets there apart from the people who are unwell from a health perspective. But that's just definitely not the case in terms of evolutionary and kind of genetics. But do you like my yardstick for whether you're too fat? You just like maybe get a lineup of 10 men and women, and they just kind of, if you get, I don't know, a few hits, it's like that, what's that game, that Asian game where you hit the buzzer and you got to be like the last one standing? It's like that dating show.
Squid Games.
It's great. It's so brutal because like no one's more brutal than like Chinese culture because it's all about appeal. Like
So
like,
it's interesting
stark,
you say Chinese culture. So I spent a year living in China, and one of the things that would be really like culturally very different is you go and get a massage or something like that, and
Whoa, whoa.
not that kind of massage. And then someone would you'd get someone they'd look and you go, oh, how big are you? You must be 100 kilos or something. So there's no sensibility over
Jing,
over things
get the
like
big
that.
jar of jelly.
Yeah. This I mean it's completely different cultural traits and attitudes towards size, and it's I think that's something we need to remember always as well when we're talking about this in the context of Western civilization.
And like I mean in a lot of different ways, but that Asian culture is much less tactful about the physicality of people. So most Asian people have this memory of like meeting relatives or people they haven't seen for a while, and always the first thing you get is like straight away it's like you either have gained weight, you're too skinny, like they'll make something, or you've grown, you haven't grown, you're short or tall. They have very overt kind of judgment on your appearance, right? And I think that's something that really comes out, right? Like they don't mess around with it. They're just like, or if you are good looking, they'll shower that on you, and if you're not, they'll kind of like say that too, and they take it for what it is. So it's a very different way compared to the Western style, where everyone's a lot more tactful about that, right?
Yeah. No, well,
If you don't know what they think.
Well, but it's such a sensitive topic too. It's people do really very much care about these things, and it's seen as a source of, well, for many people, a source of shame, or and I guess maybe the conversation today is partly should people be compelled to feel shame about something like this, is this something that they should just not worry about? And I think we've kind of landed halfway in the middle where yes, to some extent, people should be concerned about this because there's probably is a health consequence, and there
Yeah.
is a genuine cost to everyone else or to society or whatever. But then equally, fuck, like, people just want to find reasons to like take issue and pick on other people. So maybe we need to stop that part of human nature.
That bullying aspect, like, and that stigma. I guess where my to wrap it up on my, like in my thoughts, right, and consolidate some of this conversation, my middle is really that yes, like on a population scale, tolerance is the key, right? People going through things you've got no fucking idea, like what they're dealing with, what they have access to, the resources they have access to. So just like treat them with respect, and it's not easy, right? And especially once you're up there on that really extreme end of obese, it's so hard as an adult to get that back down, right? And so treat them with respect. But on a more personal level, and if people that I were in my family or friends and things that I love, yeah, I mean, to me, I have no doubt that being heavily overweight has real health issues. And if you want to do the best for your family, be around there for your kids and all that kind of stuff, I think, getting that health weight down, and weight's like the end result of a healthy lifestyle in a lot of ways. Not always, but in most cases. And I think that your friends and family should promote that, and you want to be around people who actually care about you enough not to enable that, right? You got the rest of the world to be tolerant of you and let you do and turn a blind eye to habits that aren't so good. But your friends and family should really be encouraging you, I think, to live a healthy lifestyle. And I'm not talking about 6% body fat with rippling abs and stuff. I'm just talking about you know, staying whole, staying, you know, in the normal kind of, your normal BMI. And then maybe that's where the BMI becomes handy for just everyday people. I don't know. Um, but yeah, that's kind of my middle.
Yeah, I think my middle is probably a little bit less interventionist than yours. I think I would be a little bit more open to just be like, fuck, like stay in your lane sort of thing. So I think people who are a certain of, in let's say an unhealthy weight range or whatever, they know it, right? They already get it. There's nothing you can do to give them some, revelation that they aren't already aware of, right? So I think just in the spirit of being tolerant and people sort of feeling comfortable with one another and living a the best possible life that they can live without worrying about others judging them. We should just mind those sensitivities. I think that it's actually quite a good thing that culturally we've built those. But I guess at the same time, that doesn't mean that we shouldn't be, let's say, bringing up our children to understand what it is to live a healthy life, or, for example, at a societal level, having policies that incentivize and encourage people to,
Yeah.
preventative healthcare, for example, like that we shouldn't be doing things like that. So I think that's probably where I'd be a little bit different. So I think family and friends, fuck off. Like, you know what I mean? Like, just, if someone comes to me and says, oh, look, we think you've put on 3-4 kilos. I knew it before you did. I couldn't fit into my jeans. Trust me, I don't need you to tell me that. That would be my attitude to it.
I mean, just give me a second to leave a few messages.